Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Hop-Ons podcast, a community review podcast sponsored by our Patreon supporters. My name is Colin Cox.
Yo, Joe, my name is John Phelps. Colin, good evening. How are you?
Hey, I was thinking about something today. So I think my favorite pop song is Invisible Touch by Genesis.
Is it, though? Really?
I really think so. I think it might be. This is not silly. I think it's maybe the best final 45 seconds of a pop song.
That's a very wild sort of definition that you've put on.
I love the last 45 seconds.
Okay. I don't know what it sounds like,
so
but all right, sure.
It's when so Phil Collins, I don't know this technique where it's multiple vocal tracks, and so he's singing she seems to have an invisible touch, and then in the back you can hear invisible touch, and then he does the oh. It's great.
All right, we're here to talk about an episode of Community.
Speaking about things that peaked in the 80s, John, we are here to discuss.
Oh, man, we're in the heyday of the toys now. I love it.
Season 5. I was thinking specifically G.I. Joe, maybe, but I think you can contextualize this for us. Season 5, Episode 11 of Community, G.I. Jeff. But, John, before we do that, I have other thoughts about Genesis. I'm kidding. No, YouTube, we've mentioned this before. I started putting our episodes on YouTube. It's not all of the Arrested Development Twin Peaks episodes, but if you want to interact with us, that might be a great way to do it, especially for those of you who once used Twitter, but now for obvious reasons do not. And we would like to thank, in particular, Deadline63, who has interacted with us a lot on YouTube. Go to YouTube, Hop-Ons podcast. You can leave comments. That might be a better alternative, or just an alternative to using Twitter.
Deadline would be the G.I. Joe who also moonlighted as a photojournalist or a newspaper writer. Deadline, come on.
Where's your copy, Deadline?
And Deadline always had a pencil behind their ear.
Always the pencil, yeah.
That was Deadline's thing, yeah. That'd be great.
And the best part is,
I'd buy that toy, absolutely.
Anytime they cut to Deadline, he's shot in the split diopter reference.
Oh, that makes sense. That'd be great. That'd be absolutely perfect.
Sense, right? Yeah.
Yeah. He always has a notepad for some reason. That's Deadline.
He's always taking notes, yeah. John, this episode originally aired on April the 3rd, 2014, directed by Rob Schraub.
Yeah,
and written
I knew you were going to say it. I knew it.
I know. So, written by Starburns, Dino Stampatopoulos.
That's it. One take, he got it, everybody.
I did it, yeah. John, that's not how to pronounce his name. I don't care. This is your IMDb plot summary. The entire group becomes part of the cast of a classic G.I. Joe cartoon from the 1980s, which turns out to be part of Jeff's coping mechanism as he deals with a monumental life event. One that John, correct me if I'm wrong, you are also embarking upon this life event.
Oh, wow. Soon. Yeah, thanks for bringing that fucking up, dude.
Listen, I'm there, okay? So, yeah.
I've been there now for a couple months, yes. And
oh, okay.
I turned 40 back on the 21st of August. I am now 40 years of age. I have set sail with Gandalf and Frodo into the Grey Havens. That's where I am right now.
What form did your psychosis take?
Oh, that's fascinating. Well, I don't know for those of you that have never recorded a podcast with me, behind me there are 10 shelves that are just chock-a-block of 6-inch action figures. So that is sort of where this episode did a lot to me, nostalgically. Toy makers understand who their primary audience is now, and it is people who, like myself, grew up in the 80s and 90s, who longed to have these plastic collectibles of things we loved as a youth. And so that is what is currently on display behind me. I have it, like I said last time, I have an entire shelf right here of the new G.I. Joe. Like, the G.I. Joes are my favorite figure. I buy all of them. I'm obsessed with them.
Like them a lot,
I have the little guys, and now I have the new big guys, and they're just... Anyway, that's the form of my psychosis. That's the Stay Puft Marshmallow Man that the Destroyer form took for me. Sure. Was all this.
Yeah, I think anyone who's listened for a while probably knows this about you, because I distinctly remember in your old apartment, you didn't have as much room there as you have in this beautiful office area you built for yourself.
Yeah.
I distinctly recall interrupting several episodes because I would knock figurines off the wall.
There were figures everywhere, and it was a very small space. But this is way better. They can stand there, and we're good to go. I don't have to deal with it, so.
Yeah. No fear of me destroying them, so.
Yeah. No, we have a lot to talk about with G.I. Joe. This is my favorite episode of Community because it's me, and it's very sad that Jeff has sort of, to deal with his fear of being an adult, he has just somehow subconsciously steeped himself into his favorite cartoon when he was a kid, and I would definitely do this as well, I think.
Yeah, and something we will definitely discuss is how formally this episode is quite similar to the stop motion animation Abed Christmas episode, which Abed actually references. And it's interesting because the justification, the reason why this happens, it's something quite similar. It's trauma, right? So this is Jeff's traumatic response, and we can discuss, and again, who am I to say someone should not feel this, but maybe, I don't know, maybe it's not even worth judging if this is as traumatic as what Abed experiences, but it's very real to Jeff, and I suppose that's the point. But John, quickly, for a bit of context, because we didn't do that, on ABC, Once Upon a Time in Wonderland at 2.3.
All right.
On CBS, The Big Bang Theory at 10.8.
Oh, I didn't take time to make a goof. I'm so sorry out there for people that were this one day. Go ahead and mark the calendar back. It's been 0 days since I've made a goof on Big Bang Theory. I'm so sorry.
Well, you can maybe. Here's an opportunity for a mea culpa, because I think people really like your Gordon Ramsay. Fox, Hell's Kitchen at 3.2.
You fucking donkeys! Is this a risotto? That's what you call this? You fucking idiots! I'm old Gordon. I've quickly turned into Cockney internet. That's where I've gone to. Holy shit.
I don't recall Gordon Ramsay having a Cockney accent, but hey.
No, Gordon Ramsay has a very mean accent. I love him, though. I love that old bastard. Anyway, what was their score, by the way? What'd they get?
3.2.
Okay. That's way down there.
Yeah.
Sheldon came in and took his huge nuts out and hit them on everybody's face, huh? That's what happened here.
Listen, it's certainly an intriguing metaphor that we can discuss, but sure. I'll say this: Gordon Ramsay keeps popping up on some of my social media feeds because now he's an ambassador for Triscuits, I think.
That is fucking wild. He got to the point where he just loves money now, so that's why.
Now who's the fucking donkey?
I guarantee you, if anybody brought this man Triscuits at any point in his life he would rip them a new asshole.
I know. Yeah, Triscuits. It's those reaction videos where he's watching and responding and reacting to people making things. And John, they're all incredibly positive. It's perhaps just a coincidence that they're all cooking with Triscuits. So
now you're cooking with Triscuits. Which is a wild thing to say. Hey, who cooks fucking crackers?
John, Community, NBC. Oh, Big Loser, 1.6 tonight.
Oh, 1.6. Hachi Machi. Didn't even break 2 on that one.
It was bad.
What a bummer.
Well, John, let us leave this unnecessarily protracted preamble. You need to talk to us about G.I. Joe a bit. I must tell you, you and I are approximately the same age. I think I'm 2 years older than you, maybe. I never watched G.I. Joe.
Okay.
Never.
Understandable.
Never.
Understandable.
So I'm here to learn.
Okay.
However you want to do this.
Fascinating.
Talk to us about G.I. Joe.
G.I. Joe is so here. Everything stems from Masters of the Universe, which is He-Man. For those of you unaware, He-Man is
That I do know. I watched
okay.
He-Man.
So He-Man
Yeah.
was a cartoon that was strictly made based on the popularity of toys made by Mattel. Mattel came out with this line of 5.5-inch action figures, and they could barely move. They were really chunky. It was a very homoerotic show, I will say that much. And I was obsessed with He-Man at a young age. It was my favorite cartoon. And then Hasbro, who is like a mega conglomerate now for toys, they make Magic the Gathering. They have the license to Marvel and Star Wars and Fortnite. They have a license for a lot of things.
Oh,
And they also decided, let's make a cartoon with toys that we can sell a shit ton of. So they went to the 3.7-inch market. Now there was 3.75 inch, excuse me. There was GI Joes in the 60s. Those are like your big taller, foot tall Ken doll, quote unquote, size dolls, and they didn't really have a name so much as they were like paratrooper, skydiver, things like that. But then they saw that Mattel was like blowing up with all these characters and He-Man, so they reach out and they make GI Joe, and GI Joe's essentially a good versus bad. They can't use bullets because they don't want kids to shoot real bullets, so they use laser guns. They fight Cobra. It gives them the opportunity to make the most insane amount of fucking toys you could imagine, and I ate it up. I can distinctly remember where I used to live when I was about 7 years old. Actually younger than that. Maybe I was like 5. My mom would always do the scratchy lottery tickets when she got off work. She'd get a couple of scratchers, and if she won, she'd take me and buy me a GI Joe. And so like my
oh my.
collection grew a lot because back in the day you get a GI Joe $5. Now forget about it.
Oh, really?
With Biden in office, Colin, are you kidding me? GI Joe
Thanks,
$5?
thanks, Obama.
Yeah. Thanks a lot. No, but now like everything I buy is 6-inch scale, so that's like
Okay.
double the size of the little tiny guys.
That's a good length. Most people say that's a great length.
That's a great link. Personally, I think it's a little big, but I fell in love with
Oh,
the
do you
toys.
mean long or wide? Because I meant wide.
Oh, they're all girthy boys. Anyway, so this show, this episode really does a good job at capturing just how insanely wild that cartoon was. If you get a chance, the whole series is streaming on Tubi for free. GI Joe is. Just watch an episode, and you will see how fucking nuts everything in this goddamn show is. But it's really funny because no one ever dies. That's the thing. No one ever really gets murdered in any of these shows. That's purposeful. You don't want kids to see somebody die. So that was my favorite thing, is that out the gate they killed not just any random. They killed Destro, who was like one of the most popular Cobra characters ever. He's just like so popular. Also, they got much of the original voice actors
That's
from
what I
GI
read
Joe,
too.
which is pretty cool. But yeah, I think
Yeah.
if you were into boys toys back in the day when you were around that age, 5 to 10ish, GI Joe probably played a pretty big role in your childhood. It definitely did for me.
Yeah, and I think the episode that was really great. Thank you, John. The episode, it offers some rather hilarious criticisms of the production quality, like how the voices wouldn't work. The recycling of that punching animation.
It's so good, man.
It's John.
That's a good
it's the
joke.
best. It's maybe the best joke of the season. It's so fucking funny.
It is, yeah.
But despite all of the triviality of a show like GI Joe, and as you said, the simple fact that it was really just a Trojan horse to sell toys to children,
Absolutely, yeah.
I think the episode is really quite smart, especially when thinking about this idea that characters do not die, articulating what we find so incredibly satisfying about serialized storytelling, and it's that sense that the story can never end. And I like the way this episode actually grapples with that dynamic. What happens to a story in particular a serialized story,
Yeah.
when you start to ask larger questions like, how do we end this? And you can see, even for these characters who are, as we understand it, just projections of Jeff's imagination, you can see them grappling with this existential question, grappling with this existential trauma of what does it mean for us to maybe end this story? Because once someone dies, that has a cascading effect that may necessitate the end of this unless we make a different set of decisions. And I think, again, that is an interesting way of thinking about, well, what is this episode really on about in relation to Jeff? And I think for him, clearly turning 40 years old signifies the end of something. It's as if he's seeing the narrative of his life, this serialized story he's told himself, moving and transitioning toward an end, even though 40 is obviously not the end, but it feels that way for him. It's the end of something. And so again, we spoke about this last week, how these final few episodes want to, it seems, explore and reckon with storytelling. And I think this is a subtle way this episode does it. What happens when a serialized story either decides or someone forces it to shift toward ending it? You see this like capital T trauma just infect everyone and everything. And I think that's really fascinating. And that's one of the reasons I like this episode, because I have the impression a lot of Community fans don't. But I think you need to reckon with how this episode wants to reckon with storytelling. And I think that's really clever.
That's very well said. I think before I watched it, I've always looked up lists of like the most disliked episodes, and this one tends to fall way up there. People really don't seem to like this episode that much, and so I didn't know what I was getting into. I thought maybe it would be along the lines of the foosball match. Remember when they do like the anime?
People don't seem to like that one.
Yeah, I thought, oh, maybe they'll do that, and I can see why. But from the outset, it is just straight on. We're in a GI Joe episode now, and then we even have this like ethereal dream of the commercials from when you were a child, which are done extraordinarily well. And I want to say, for me, and this is someone, a nerd looks back at 40 sort of situation where I understand why media is so important now, because it is never ending. And I think Jeff, at the end of this episode, also recognizes that media is never ending. He definitely wants to not age, but he also is at a point where he's like, we can just stay here forever and blow shit up forever, because G.I. Joe will literally never die until like the sun blows the earth up. G.I. Joe will always exist. And so that's like a really wildly daunting thing to think about, but also like super comforting at the same time, to know that there's media that we've loved our whole life that we can always return to. And I think that is why Jeff shows up here, is like, this is a comfort, maybe subconsciously, for him, which I like that a lot.
No, I would agree with that. I think this, and this is something you and I have spoken about a lot, this play by, I believe, Annie Baker called Mr. Burns. I've spoken about this play multiple times. It's a play about the Cape Fear episode of The Simpsons, that in a like post-apocalyptic world where people do not have access to all of that digital media, different acting troops reimagine it really just through this oral tradition, to the point that after a few hundred years, Mr. Burns becomes like this Macbethian tragic figure.
Yeah,
and he's not even in the episode. It's a Sideshow Bob episode. But what I think is interesting, though, John, because I agree with you. I think there is this recognition that media, in particular, this media from Jeff's childhood, it will continue, it will persist. But I think that, funnily enough, is also the site of deep anxiety, sadness, and maybe even a kind of like existential crisis. Because think about what that means. You as the consumer, as an individual autonomous consumer, are not the most important thing or person here. The most important thing in person is the cultural property itself.
Sure.
You, in many ways, are irrelevant, and this is, I think, what is funny and deeply ironic about it. We often look at these kinds of stories and think, my goodness, aren't these characters so wildly generic? And to some degree they are, but from the cultural properties perspective, we're just, what are we? We're just a generic person consuming it. We have less specificity than the cultural property itself. And again, I think that's fascinating and a way of thinking about why this is, as you said, and I agree with you, both an opportunity for Jeff to feel better about this transition in his life, but it's also a moment that perhaps provokes an even deeper kind of anxiety, because as a consumer, he'll just die. And as you said, this bit of cultural property will just persist. But I suppose once you insert yourself into that cultural property, maybe you too have you too can last and persist in ways that just being a consumer with, a flesh sack like all of us do can't.
Wasn't there a movie made where somebody was like, before I die, upload my brain into somebody else's body or some shit like that? Make me a computer. I feel like that's got to exist.
Well, I mean, yeah, like this is the kind of thing that's been like, this is a pretty popular trope in a lot of like science fiction media. Like this Netflix series Altered Carbon is basically this. It's just people, so their bodies are just these shells. I mean, even Ghost in the Shell, right? Isn't that to some degree about like transporting one's consciousness from one physical body or form to the next? I'm trying to think of other examples, but even though this is clearly not a sci-fi episode, the way Jeff interacts with this cultural property, it feels like, I think you're right, it feels like the kind of thing you would see in science fiction, right? Like, how can I find a way to really become immortal to some degree? Well, what if I transcend my status as a consumer and I become part of the story?
Yeah.
I like that. Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, this episode starts with Jeff and his crew. They're all G.I. Joes now. They have individualized character names. Annie is Tight Ship. She is a take on Shipwreck, except they made her have gigantic bosoms and midriff showing.
They're so big.
They're humongous.
It's absurd. Yeah. Yeah.
Jeff is Wingman, and he's like a lot like Duke. Duke is the leader of the Joes. He's the good guy, leader of the Joes. Shirley is three kids, which is one of my favorite fucking things in the whole episode. She just keeps saying I have three kids, which is great. So fucking funny. Britta is Buzzkill, and
Correct.
her outfit, she has saw blades on her arm. There is an actual G.I. Joe named Buzzer who is in. I saw him when they did Destro's funeral. And I thought, there's Buzzer. They have a lot in common, him and Buzzkill do. And then Abed is Fourth Wall, and he is dressed in... This is something G.I. Joe did. They have native clothing. I'm trying to see if I can spot it in my background. I have Spirit. He's right here behind Wolverine. I see him poking out. His name's Spirit, and he's a Native American G.I. Joe. He's like an eagle on him and stuff. So Jeff's joke about your like... I can't remember, he said three sheets towards racism or something along those lines.
Yeah, I mean, what he's basically saying is you as a character could appear in the Atlanta Braves gift shop, basically. Like, that's what that is. Yeah.
And it's very funny to me that also means that, like, the writers of G.I. Joe don't understand the difference in what an Indian and a Native American is, which is
correct. Yeah,
something that they would totally do that. My other favorite in joke
they
is
call
that
themselves Indians. It's like they're all just like Indians, right? Yeah, no, it's wild. Like, no, that's G.I. Joe would totally do that. So.
Is that Duncan is Zimzat. So Zimzam, excuse me.
Zimzam, yeah.
So before we start recording, I showed Colin I have Tomax and Zaymont. They are literally twins who, when one gets hurt, their brother fills it. They are dressed in the same thing they put Zimzam in the show. I love that so much. That's a great joke. And then we've got Hickey is Dr. Dick. Is that what he's called? Mr. Dick?
Major Dick.
Major Dick. Major Dick. He's a take on Major Blood, who was one of my favorite GI Joe villains. Same outfit, and I love that he's just old. He can't like roll out of the way because he's an old man. And then the Dean is like the assistant Cobra commander, basically.
He has strong like Dwight Schrute vibes with that name.
He does, yeah.
Yeah. And Chang's my favorite. Chang is overkill.
Which is a play on all the things wrong with Chang. It's very, very good.
Oh, I meant to tell you something about Hickey. Remind me the actor's name who plays Hickey. What's his name?
Jonathan Banks.
Jonathan Banks. Okay. Do you remember a couple of episodes ago when he corrects Jeff's grammar and says it's for whom, by whom, but he got the third part right?
Yeah.
That is a joke about Breaking Bad because apparently Jonathan Banks would ask them to change the script to correct for grammar. And he actually has a line where he says who when he should say whom or whom. And they didn't change it. And he spoke about it on like Conan or something.
That's amazing.
That's what that is.
That's very good.
I thought you would like that. Yeah.
That's very, very good.
All of these names are really funny, but you're right. Jeff is ostensibly the leader.
Yes.
But John, his name is Wingman. And I think this is interesting because in a situation, I don't know, like if you and I were single people and like you wanted to take your 6-incher and see what you could do with it, and you wanted me with you, I would be your wingman, right? But I would not be the primary. I think it's fascinating how Jeff is both. He frames himself as the primary, but his name suggests a kind of subordination.
Yeah, well, we've talked a lot about that Jeff is not who Jeff thinks he is, and further on in the show, Jeff has realized that Jeff is not that anymore. Character-wise, it's his episode, so he has to be the leader of it. But in reality, it could have been Abed's show, and Jeff would have just been there. But yeah, I think that's a great play on that. I think Jeff is slowly understanding that he fits the group better when he's not a total dick leader, you know?
Yeah, when he's the wingman. Yeah, and that's what I think is wonderful about this. As you said, he situates himself as the primary while simultaneously undercutting his position as the primary. So he is both the primary and not the primary. And that's a lovely little thing they do because they could have made his name, well, anything really. It didn't need to be Wingman, but I think there's a deliberate, as you said, a deliberate play, a deliberate bit of irony by calling him that. John, where would you like to go from here talking about this episode? Because I think this is an interesting episode, but I must confess, after discussing what I think this episode wants to say about storytelling, I'm a bit bereft, and I would just love to know what you would like to talk about with this episode.
So for me, this episode is Jeff's fever dream. That's how I saw it when I saw it the first time. He's definitely coming in and out of consciousness. G.I. Joes are saying, like 3 kids in Tight Ship are saying things that obviously Shirley and Annie are saying in the hospital room that he's in.
Yeah.
So he is fading in and out of a fever dream, and like a fever dream, things get progressively weirder. And so I love that his code word to push him further into this insanity is the word Greendale, which he has sort of given his life to at this point. Maybe found his purpose, I would say. And maybe that's what he's afraid of. Every time they say Greendale, he does not want to go back to sort of what's made him this way. Even though in reality, like he by the end we realize like he really is happy that this is what's made him this way. I think there's a great moment when he finally gets to Greendale after passing out twice and going through these wild nostalgic commercials, which are done incredibly well. On his desk where he has his booze, there's the card from Pierce that Pierce got him. And so there's this like moment of, oh, okay. So he's incredibly afraid now of becoming an older Pierce, basically. And I love subconsciously, even in his fever dream, even there is an animated version of the card that Pierce got him.
Yeah.
So yeah, I like that a lot. I think I think this episode speaks volumes to the fears that we have, and the writer of it, Starburns, did a very good job at encapsulating the insanity of what being on a lot of medication is like, and also dwelling deep down on the fears that we deal with on a day-to-day basis.
And I'm glad you mentioned Greendale because I think you and I have often spoken about, well, Greendale, it's such a significant location, but it's more than just narrative window dressing. I would almost want to try and theorize what Greendale is and what Greendale means. And we often talk about Greendale as this place that introduces all of these restrictions. And we often think of restrictions, as the name implies, as being restrictive, right? As if to suggest, well, if I could just get beyond this restrictive place, I will find myself in this utopia of plenitude, right? Which obviously never happens. And I guess the point is, like, I think the thing that Community is so good at articulating is how the restrictions of Greendale, that moment when characters recognize Greendale as a restrictive place, that creates the possibility for things to actually happen. It's only through restriction that things are possible. This is how, for example, I talk to my students about the sonnet form and how, listen, you might learn the rules of the sonnet form and think, oh, this is incredibly restrictive. I don't like this. I would rather write a free verse poem. Okay, go try and write a free verse poem. Do you know what sucks about writing a free verse poem? There are no rules.
There's no rules, sure.
There's no rules. That sucks. I say the same thing about menus at restaurants. When I go to restaurants and there's a 12-page menu, just give me 3 options.
Oh, yeah,
The restriction,
boy, oh boy. Yeah.
The restriction.
No Cheesecake Factory for this guy.
No, God, no. John, I'm always searching for moments of restriction because of this fallacy of a non-restrictive place. And that's what I think is interesting about this episode is how Jeff almost tricks himself into thinking that this animated environment is a place beyond restriction. This is the site of plenitude. But it's not. I mean, he, as you said, unconsciously drives and moves himself toward that space of restriction because I think there's a recognition that, and I think we all do this. We all seek restriction in some ways. We all talk about so much how we want freedom, but I don't think we do. I think we understand that the only way to get to freedom is through restriction. And I think it's interesting that that is Jeff's narrative path in this episode, is getting back to that place of restriction, because that's where he really sees and experiences freedom. Not this place of, like, I don't know, false plenitude. And that's what I would call it. It's a kind of false plenitude, and it just cannot exist.
Yeah, well said. I like that a lot. Did you feel, and I just got to ask it because I felt this way, that they're doing an Inception thing? Did you feel like there was an Inception thing? Okay.
Right?
Just making sure it wasn't me. When Abed draws the thing on the board, I went, oh, okay, they're doing an Inception thing. And the kick is to put a backpack on Jeff and let him jetpack through the ground, through the dreams, into our reality.
Correct. Yeah.
Can we talk for a little bit about the commercials?
I would love to, because I think this is clearly where this episode, I mentioned earlier, it's similar to the Abed Christmas episode, but this is one of the ways that it departs, because Abed's episode, that stop motion animated episode, it doesn't have this third layer, right?
Yeah. Abed is the most powerful person in this world because he understands the rules, that there are none. Okay. He gets that I'm never going to get shot unless Jeff shoots me. No one's ever going to shoot me. I can do literally anything because I understand that I am in a cartoon. And it's so much so that when we see the commercials, there is a child there who is representative of Abed. There are moments in the commercials where a kid is like, none of this is real. It doesn't matter. Which I loved a lot. The way the commercials are staged, again, I would probably be very good friends with Starburns because when I was a kid, there were certain things I remember from those commercials that I always wanted to do. The big one being when Wingman pulls the cord and all the rocks fall on Abed's character. I've always wanted, when I was a kid, I always wanted to sit that shit up. And like when I saw that hit, that was like core memory unlocked when I saw this. They do a good job at filming it with a film grain. They definitely had some toy maker or some really good customizer make different figures for the characters because they look so good, just like they do in the show. And I love that this is, again, like the second level of Jeff's Jeff's sort of ideal world is this, and I am guilty of this too. Maybe that's why I like this episode so much. This idea of like nostalgia commercials, nostalgia TV. I subscribe to 2 YouTube channels that are nothing but 90s and 80s commercials. That's
Do you
all they
really?
are. Yeah. And so like at
You
night,
and I were
if
talking
I'm,
about Mentos last week.
oh yeah, we were.
Yeah.
At night, if like I can't sleep or I'm wound up, I'll turn on these like 20-minute blocks of just classic commercials. And so that hit hard because I'm like, man, I also, when I'm feeling like the weight of the world on my shoulders, I go back to these things that I could grasp as a kid and really fall in love with. And I think the commercials do a good job showing, again, that, as a kid, the only thing we had to worry about was, when do we get these cool ass toys? When do we get these cool things? And I think Jeff, wants to live there because that's the only moment when you experience sort of true happiness because you're so oblivious to everything else.
Yeah, it's interesting because, and I'm glad you mentioned the commercials, and I like how you're framing it because I think there are these conceptual similarities between the world of these commercials or the world of this commercial and maybe the world of a lot of commercials and this animated G.I. Joe world, because they're both spaces of, I would argue, false plentitude. I think we've all had these experiences when watching commercials. If you watch a commercial of children playing with these toys, and then when you get the toys, John, even as a child, I was acutely aware of the fact that, well, this isn't as good as the commercial. Like, this sucks. I don't like this. I don't know if you had that experience too. I mean, John, and again, I don't think I really understood it until I became a much older person. I would have these experiences where I would watch commercials about fast food, and then we would go and get them. And John, I cannot describe the depth of my despair.
Absolute disappointment. Yeah.
I was so disappointed. And so again, like I think what's interesting and like the reason why these are seductive spaces, but spaces we must reject, is because they are spaces that offer a kind of false plentitude. They're spaces without boundaries, without restrictions. And again, like real freedom, as I mentioned before, it's freedom one experiences as one traverses restrictions, as one traverses negativity. But it explains why these companies were so effective at selling toys. And to me, I suppose, fast food meals, it's because there's the promise, like the non-lacking promise, I guess is the point. And I think you're right. Having Abed embedded in that space, offering a reminder that it feels like those characters ignore, why do you think Jeff has Abed in this space doing this? And maybe I suppose the point is, well, this is Jeff's unconscious. He has no control over this. But that also suggests that like Abed occupies a significant amount of space in his non-conscious mind, which is fascinating, I suppose.
Yeah, I think absolutely. Abed is a character who grounds Jeff in a very strange way, because I think Jeff is a character who also grounds Abed. Mm-hmm. They're both a sense of like familiarity, and I think when Jeff doesn't fully comprehend what's happening, Abed is always a character of logic, even in a world like G.I. Joe. Abed is the first character to go, here's what's happening, and here's how we fix it. And he's right. And he's never once like afraid, he's never once scared, he's just to the fact, he's the Spock to Jeff's Kirk sort of situation, I think, and vice versa. And I think that's why takes up such a big part of Jeff's brain, because much like G.I. Joe, much like nostalgia, Abed is somebody that Jeff anchors himself to, you know?
No, that's really nice. And it's interesting thinking about this episode in relation to the stop motion animated episode, because if you remember, Jeff was not nearly as supportive and charitable toward Abed as Abed is toward him.
Yeah, yeah.
And I wonder, like, there's no way of knowing this, but I wonder if that happened to Abed later, how would Jeff react to it? And I think maybe one of the tests is, I believe it was an episode. Was it a season 4 or season 5 episode when they do the Freaky Friday, when Abed and Troy do the body switch, and Jeff, he's not as charitable initially, but once he understands what happens, I think he becomes far more sympathetic, and he actually helps. I mean, he in the same way that Abed functions to ground Jeff in this episode, I think we spoke about how Jeff really grounds Troy in that episode. So I would like to think that, like, a season 4, season 5 Jeff would probably be more charitable toward Abed than he was in season 2. But I like that point, John. I think that's really, really good, because that's another interesting, ironic moment. The character that seems the least anchored, Abed, is the one who often functions as an anchor. He's the one who seems, maybe we could say, the least stable, just because of all of his meta-textual referencing, yada, yada, yada.
Yeah.
But you're right. Ironically enough, he is the one that really anchors characters more often than not. That's quite nice. I like that idea.
Yeah, you know, I'm in therapy right now, and I go through these, like, we're going on vacation soon, and we have to board our dogs for like 8 days, and that, like, really hits me hard, you know. And I start thinking, like, oh my God, what if something happens to them? What if they, like, forget who I am, you know? And then my therapist is a lot like Abed, and he's like, you know, he's like, one of the easiest ways to get out of, like, a panicky situation is to just look at logic and reason. And so once, like, I start to take that into account and break down bit by bit by bit what's happening, it super calms me. And I think that is really who Abed is for Jeff. In many situations, I think Jeff probably wants to get into that mindset and think, how can I just get down to the tiniest, you know, granular levels, so I'm not panicking about something that it shouldn't be panicked about to begin with, you know?
Yeah, and maybe we can talk about that as well. For Abed, the thing that provoked him in that episode was realizing that he would not spend Christmas with his mother, and maybe more acutely, this suggestion that she chose her new family over him.
Right.
Remarkably unkind rejection, and maybe a really devilish rejection from his mother, a character we've never met, to be clear. John, Jeff's is turning 40 and thinking that means I'm old now.
Yeah.
What do we think about this as the thing that provokes all of this? And again, not to be like, I don't think it's fair to do a kind of compare and contrast. I'm just curious what you think about it as this thing that really provokes him into buying, obviously, medication that will not do anything. I mean, this is like your Joe Rogan Liver King grift. But he takes a lot of medication, drinks a lot of scotch, and I guess, like, what do we think happens? Like falls into a momentary coma or something, or like loses consciousness and they can't wake him. But what do you think about that as a kind of motivation or inciting incident for this?
Yeah. It fits the mold. He's a character who has been obsessed with being cool, his looks, being able to get whatever type of female he might want to get, and I think this is his traumatic turn. I think a lot of people, when they hit 40, you know, he is not where he wants to be. He's not the lawyer he thought he would be. He is not married. He does not have a particularly good relationship with his with his family, and maybe that is something that just weighs on him, and so turning 40 is the trigger to absolutely losing it all. And I think there's a great moment, again, talking about how Abed is a grounding character for Jeff, when at the end of the episode it's revealed that Jeff's 40. He tells everybody in the hospital, I'm 40. And there's this moment where Abed says, you're still in the 18 to 49 demographic. You have a decade left of that, and that's like the best demographic to be in. And so I love that. I love that there's like that little moment of Abed saying that is enough. I think it would be for me as Jeff to be like, well, I mean, I still got 10 years, and then we'll go from there. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I think that's a sweet moment that really ties back to how Abed was and the whole hallucination that was going on.
Yeah, and it also beautifully complements the conceptual conceit of this episode that GI Joes, again, they were Trojan horses to sell toys. It was all about like marketable demographics, right? It's like don't fret, you're still part of the most important demographic. But John, what I also think is interesting is how like no one's really surprised, to the point that Shirley even says, "Yeah, of course you're 40. I know this. Do you think I don't know how to count?" Because we know, like, the show has clearly established that Shirley's a couple of years older than Jeff. So if Shirley's in her early 40s at this point, that would imply that Jeff at some point very soon will be 40. But John, no one really looks surprised, which I think is the best part, which I think that should really be potentially the source of comfort for Jeff is, they all know that I'm 40, despite all of maybe my attempts to masquerade myself as someone who is not, in fact, 40.
Yeah, it's nice for me to have a baby face because not many people know that I am 40. I get all the time, "Oh, you don't look 40." That could be a nice thing, but hey,
you actually
makes
don't
me
look
feel
40.
good.
Yeah.
It makes me feel pretty good.
John, I have students say that to me as well, that they hear me say I'm 41 and they don't believe me. So that's
because
nice.
he's actually 51. Don't let this fucking guy fool you. What are you talking about?
Yeah, I tell them pancreas doesn't work, but the skin as an organ is
there.
It's doing additional work. One other thing about this, I remember hearing this actor once talk about like aging and roles, and it reminded me of what Jeff grapples with in this. It reminded me of what Jeff grapples with in this episode. And she, I think at this point is like late 30s, early 40s, and she said, the older you get, you start seeing these possibilities close themselves to you forever. Like she said something like 38, 39. I had always wanted to do a particular kind of romantic comedy. I'm frankly too old to do that kind of romantic comedy now. I can't do the kind of like mid-20s, silly, goofy, potentially raunchy romantic comedy. Maybe I could, but I wouldn't be one of the romantic leads. I would be a different kind of character.
Yeah.
It was this interesting because I think also it creates a way of sympathizing with Jeff. And instead of because I think what you said is right, but in addition to that, it's Jeff seeing possibilities close themselves to him forever. And I think that is one of the more challenging parts of just getting older. It's one of the things that I've grappled with, is how there are certain things that I don't think I can do, that I'll ever do. Maybe I will, but the older I get, if I'm just thinking about, well, what's the probability, right? That percentage drops a little bit. And I think for Jeff, that's part of this too, is just like, maybe his chances with someone like Annie are gone at this point, maybe he had that opportunity at some point. Now, maybe not so much. And so it's just this slow, progressive closing of possibilities. And I could see how that would, thrust him into a kind of existential crisis where he would, do what he does in this episode. So
now I'm really sad. But I will say that, like, we especially as a country, are the way that we treat people getting older is so fucking stupid and
I agree. That's a good
makes no
point. Yeah.
sense whatsoever.
Yeah.
Society has placed these weird norms on aging, which is incredibly dumb, and much like gender norms are the fucking dumbest things in
Hmm.
the universe. So are this weird like age norms we have. But anyway, that's neither
Yeah, and
here
just
nor
to be,
there.
yeah, but no, but I think this is important, John. Just in case I wasn't clear, I think when that actor I was referencing, when she was speaking about this, she wasn't saying, for example, that like someone in their late 30s shouldn't be able to do a silly romantic comedy.
Oh
It's
no,
just
sure, yeah.
that's not like there's
That's
just
not
no
what the
path for me to
studios
do.
want. Yes,
Yeah,
exactly, exactly.
there's like no path for me to do that. And I just like I totally agree with you, and I think this is maybe not necessarily something the episode explores in too much detail, but this way that like Jeff probably needs to interrogate some of his, as you said, negative biases about being old, because you're right. And I think for Jeff, it's also like deeply intertwined with like notions of attractiveness and youthfulness as a as a virtue and like maybe not even necessarily being old, John, but appearing old is something that lacks virtue. That seems to be how Jeff thinks about this and frames it, and I totally agree with you. This is more of a wider, larger social cultural problem than it is an individual person problem.
I mean, when you're 40, you can do whatever you want. Right now on my desk, I have the GI Joe of Sergeant Slaughter. He's pointing right at you, Colin.
Yes, I feel
I also have the
very
GI Joe of
intimidated. Yeah.
Bazooka, who is my favorite GI Joe, right there
Well, look at
too.
that guy.
I,
Why
I
is he
tend to
number
be
14?
attracted to like the really like bear. I feel like if I were gay, I would be really big into the bears. I like the hairy boys with the big mustaches.
You seem
I
to.
have a
I've
type. I
noticed
certainly
that.
have a type, as they would say about Buster. Anyway, Colin, that's their conversation for season 5, episode 11. GI Jeff. It's a great episode. If you haven't seen
Wonderful
it, go
episode.
watch it. I loved it. I can't believe people don't like it. But why don't we transition into some of our segments, Colin?
Let's, John, before we do that, one small thing.
Go right ahead.
There's a joke at the end before the end tags. It's the 1889 joke. Do you remember this? When they make a
I
joke
do.
about
Also,
Kiki's
I'm really
age?
sorry if you just heard like a fart noise. That was my chair. I tried to mute it. But yes, the
I can
1889
just,
jokes. Go right ahead.
I can just, I can cut that. So, but no, I think I'll leave it in now. It's interesting how that feels, and maybe part of it is how everyone performs it. That feels like a traditional sitcom joke ending reaction. And I just wonder, like, what are we to make of this? Because the point of the episode seems to be we have now successfully we've now incepted Jeff, right? And so now we're on the plane and
Yeah.
we're back in the real world. But
Yeah.
John, everything about how they react at the end feels so fabricated, almost to the point that the episode, I mean, this is almost like the spinning top ending to Inception, where I don't know, are we still in an episode of television? Because that doesn't feel like this show is really good at times about encouraging actors to have more maybe naturalistic performance choices. And when they don't do that, we as the audience know and understand the conceptual frame that really permits them to not deliver naturalistic performances. It doesn't feel natural at all, but there's nothing about that moment that suggests that it should be an unnatural set of performance choices. I just found it in like my brain just hurts basically.
Oh,
It's like,
really? Yeah.
is this the spinning top for this episode?
I feel like you're reading very like a lot into it, but maybe. I mean, I think I think if you're looking at it from like the viewpoint that it's been Jeff's episode the whole time, Jeff could still be a little high. He could still be
Oh yeah,
a
okay.
little bit out of it, and maybe this is how Jeff wants before he finally comes to back up to the surface level. This is the way Jeff wants to end the episode. I don't know. I think that's a way to read it. I mean,
I
you
just
know.
yeah, I just thought it was weird. Well, I'll leave comments on the Inception subreddit, which is something I do quite often.
Boom. That's this Inception song by Hans Zimmer. I almost said Hans Zimmer. I love Inception, by the way. What a banger of a movie. Love that movie.
Hoons Bloomer, I think is his name.
Yeah, Hoons Bloomer. Love that guy. He's really good.
Love
Christopher
Hoons.
Guest directed it. Nobody knows that. You think Christopher Guest, you think Best in Show. You think Waiting for Guffman. No one realizes that was Inception, was Christopher Guest.
Starring Michelangelo.
Fred Willard.
I don't know. What's his last name? Leonardo
Fred Willard.
DiCaprio?
Fred Willard's every role in Inception.
Specifically with the mustache from I Think You Should Leave.
It's a very Clumps sort of situation Inception was. Did not get enough credit. Anyway, Colin, who makes the Dean's List for you? Who's your best performance this episode?
Well, I think it needs to be Jeff. I think Jeff is really quite wonderful and funny. All of his yo-jos are super funny.
They're great. Yeah. They're great. Jeff's probably mine also. I do love Abed a lot. I also like Cobra Commander, who I think was Rob Schraub. I think he voiced Cobra Commander.
He's really funny.
He's so funny.
Stuff.
When he gets the call at Destro's funeral, and he's like, "Oh, that's fascinating. Destro's dead." That was so good. I like him a lot. You know, mine's definitely Jeff. What's the next segment? Because I've forgotten.
Well, John, it's please check the syllabus, where we identify our favorite bit of metatextual referencing and intertextual play. What do you have?
Mine is the Zim Zam joke when they shoot Duncan in the leg, and his brother, who is a waiter at a restaurant, feels the pain and falls down when he's giving the specials. I love that. That's a great joke. What about you, buddy?
This is one that I made up. I don't think it's real. After they shoot Chang, he says, "Maleg," and I told you it reminds me of how everyone says "Milady" in Clone Wars.
I don't think that's real, but I did like that. That's very good.
Yeah.
Best lines, the Destro's dead lines made me laugh every time. The best line in the episode is when they're in the real world, and Chang is reading the...
Dude, it's so...
and she says, it's Korean. And he's like, "What am I?" And she said, they all say, "You're Chinese." What a joke. What a good fucking joke. That was so great.
Solid, yeah.
What about you? Okay. Give me your best lines.
Yeah. So this is Britta, which will clearly happen any day now, as long as your tits are on full display. And then you yell, "Buzzkill language!" Like what a great start to the episode. I'm in a battle called having 3 kids. That's
so good.
That's Shirley. This is Jeff's Yo Joe. Well, we're not saying it together. This is a Britta line. We're all just dressed like serial killers and strippers.
So good.
Yeah. And G.I. Joe is going to pay, bruh. I riffed that. No wrong answers.
So good.
Cobra, avenge my totally platonic friend. What do you mean, you people? And then, so Shirley and Abed said that together, and they say, "Oh, nice, yeah." Hey, you people can actually die now. It affects the health plan. That's something the dean says. This is that Chang line. He shredded my meniscus.
So good.
Okay, dude. So this is something Britta says. There's a reference to her getting high, and her performance after that is bananas. She says, "I want to be Buzzkill because my awesome saw." Real. She's so stoned. Like I love the idea that in Jeff's unconscious, his projection of Britta gets high at some point. Yo Jobra is because Cobra and the G.I. Joes decide to form a kind of collective. Yes, I can feel it. Yes, I can feel it. I can feel reality. I've never felt so alive. That's something as he's holding on to Jeff.
Cobra is.
Yeah. This is Korean. Wait, what am I? Chinese. This is an Abed exchange with everyone when he says, "Remember that Christmas when I," and then everyone shouts yes, which implies he talks about this a lot. Very funny. Well, John Phelps, that is our conversation for season 5, episode 11, G.I. Jeff. John, if anyone wants to, I don't know, provide funds so you can buy more G.I. Joe figurines.
That would be fucking awesome.
They could do that through Patreon. John, we have a Patreon page.
We have a Patreon page. It's the first link in the show notes. For $3 a month, you get all the exclusive content. We have not decided what we're doing this month. I suggested maybe something spooky because it's October.
I have ideas. We'll talk about it.
Colin has ideas. Yeah. We'll talk about it. Above that, $7 a month, become producer of the show. You get all the exclusive content and a sticker, and we talk about you every episode. Above that, you get a shirt, a sticker, and we talk about you every episode. Above that, you can come and hang out and see all of my G.I. Joes. My 6-inchers and the other ones, if you know what I'm saying. Colin.
Thank you to the following producers. Thank you to Katana, Crindy, Rachel, Kate, Rob, Robin, Jeff, and Andrew. And John's right. The Patreon link is the first link in the show notes. The second link is to our Threadless page if you want to buy Hop-Ons podcast merchandise. And John Phelps, if someone were so inclined as to rate and review this beautiful, wonderful, non-animated podcast, which is regrettable, what would you say? What would I say?
Well, it would be quite lovely, and we would read your reviews here on the show. Ratings and reviews do help the show get noticed, so when you search for your favorite town planning and community podcasts, we are the #1 result. For a second, we were like #1 in Ethiopia or something, some weird... Uganda. There was a country we were like really popular in.
Well, I wouldn't say Uganda's weird, John.
No, that's not what I meant. I didn't mean weird like that, you asshole.
My apologies, everyone. No, we are surprisingly popular in Poland, it seems.
Poland, yeah. We're regular superstars over there. Colin and I could walk up. We're regular Bill Skarsgårds over in Poland. I don't know. It's the first actor that popped into my head.
Are they from Poland? Do you even know this? I don't think they're from Poland.
We're regular. Who's a Polish actor? There's got to be one. There's got to be one Polish actor. Don Cheadle. That makes sense. Don Cheadle, the lovely, wonderful Polish actor. We're just like him. Anyway, Colin. God damn.
Poland's national treasure, Don Cheadle.
Don Cheadle.
That's correct.
Everybody knows that. If you know one thing about Don Cheadle, is that he is Polish. Colin, that's all I have to talk about this evening. Thank you all for listening. Until next time, for the Hop-Ons show, it's me, John.
I don't have a nickname. I am Colin.
I'm a little drunk. I don't want to. I'm turning red. I can see it on camera.
I'll see you later.
Okay, bye.